His hands touched my chin, forcing me to face him, and I felt the warmth of his skin contrast with the cold that pierced through me. His eyes, impossible to name, were either judging me or saving me, I didn't know which. The silence around us was thick, heavy as lead. And then he said, in a voice that cut the air like a blade, "She is the chosen one." The words opened an abyss beneath my feet. Before we dive into this story, leave your comment with a rating from 1 to 10 and tell us which city you're joining us from. May this moment bring reflection and emotion to your heart. I was cast out in front of everyone. The word impure echoed off the stone walls like a seal of exile, marking me more deeply than any visible wound. I remember the sound of the trembling candles, the muffled murmur of the faithful, and the smell of incense mixed with shame. With every step I took out of the circle, I felt the weight of their gazes burning my skin. There was no place for me among those who called themselves holy. My knees trembled, but I kept my head held high. The cold floor seemed more merciful than the mouths that prayed while condemning me. The lips that uttered prayers also spat judgments, and I was the target of both. I walked slowly, feeling every uneven stone under my bare feet, every draught of cold air that slipped through the cracks of the high windows. The temple, which had been my prison and my refuge, now rejected me as a body rejects poison. I wanted to scream, but my voice was trapped somewhere deep inside me, suffocated by fear and humiliation. Tears burned in my eyes, but I refused to shed them there. I wouldn't give them that satisfaction. Not while they could still see me. The heavy temple door creaked open before me like a muffled cry, and the night outside awaited with its total and indifferent darkness. Since childhood, I had been raised within the temple grounds. The daughter of a servant, never of noble blood, I grew up cleaning the altars, listening to the confessions of others, and keeping secrets that did not belong to me. They said my mother had died for a sin that was not named. They also said the same stain ran in my veins. And so, between fear and whispers, I learned to be silent. I had no memory of her. Only fragments that other people told me in whispers, always looking over their shoulders, always afraid of being heard. I learned early on that my existence was a source of discomfort. The other children of the temple did not play with me. The servants avoided me. The priestesses looked at me with a mixture of pity and contempt, as if I were a living reminder of something they preferred to forget. My only inheritance was an iron necklace cold like her memory with a small engraved symbol, an incomplete circle. I hid it under my clothes, fearing someone would recognize it, though I myself did not know what it meant. The metal was rough and heavy against my skin, but it was all that connected me to her. Sometimes, on nights when the loneliness became unbearable, I would hold it between my fingers and try to imagine the hands that had touched it before mine. I tried to imagine if she too had felt fear, if she too had felt so completely alone. The ceremony that night was sacred. The Alpha King had come in person to preside over the ritual, and everyone trembled in his presence. It was said that he was a man with a gaze that could undress you, a voice that bent wills, and hands that carried the fate of each of us. When he entered, the hall seemed to fall silent by instinct. Even the flames bowed slightly in his direction. I saw him in a glimpse before I was dragged into the center of the circle, accused of desecrating the altar with my mere existence. He was a tall man with broad shoulders and an overwhelming presence. His movements were measured, controlled, like those of a predator who doesn't need to hurry because it knows its prey has nowhere to run. The dark cloak he wore seemed to absorb the light around him, and his eyes, when they briefly landed on me, were of a shade I had never seen before, something between grey and gold, like molten metal. The priestesses, covered in white veils, formed a wheel, and the eldest raised her voice. "This young woman carries the trace of the ancient error. She cannot remain among us." Her voice was thin and sharp, filled with an unshakable conviction. She pointed at me with a bony finger, trembling not with fear but with righteous indignation, or so she believed. It was then that the murmuring grew, and my shame became a spectacle. One of the women spat on the ground, another turned her face away. I, without understanding why, felt the air thin, the floor disappear from under my feet. My heart was beating so hard I could hear it in my ears, drowning out all other sounds. The world around me became a blur, as if I was submerged in murky water. The king watched. There was no anger in his face, only something deeper. Curiosity, perhaps, or recognition. Something that made me feel even more exposed than I already was. When they told me to kneel, my legs gave out before I could obey. The iron necklace slipped from my neck, revealing itself in the candlelight. A dense silence fell over everyone. The mark of the incomplete circle shimmered as if the metal had a memory. It was as if every person in the hall had stopped breathing at the same time. The priestess recoiled, pale. "It's the sign," someone murmured. "The same sign as her mother's." The words spread through the hall like ripples in still water, each repetition carrying more weight, more terror. I tried to grab the necklace, to hide it again, but my hands were shaking so much I could barely move. I felt everyone's eyes on that small metal circle, on the mark I had never understood. The king moved then. A single step was enough for the entire atmosphere to change. The authority of centuries seemed to bow to his presence. His eyes of an unnameable color landed on me with the gravity of a sentence. "Raise her," he ordered. No one dared to move. His voice was not loud, but it carried a weight that made the walls tremble. He approached himself, took off his black gloves and touched my chin, forcing me to face him. His skin was warm, contrasting with the cold that ran through me. His fingers were firm but not brutal. He studied me as if I were an ancient text, difficult to decipher. "She is the chosen one," he said at last. The words, so simple, opened an abyss. The priestesses hesitated and the circle shattered like glass. I heard the sound of dragging fabrics, retreating footsteps, quickened breaths. The entire room seemed to be entering a silent panic, but no one dared to contradict the king. I was so stunned I couldn't process what was happening. A moment before, I was being cast out, marked as impure. Now this powerful man was declaring me chosen. Chosen for what? Why? My mind spun in empty circles. I was taken back to the temple, not as a servant, but as an omen. They said the king had seen something in me, a reflection, a forgotten power. I didn't know what it was, but I felt an ancient rumor within me, like a distant drum echoing in deep caves. The women who once despised me now watched me with fear disguised as respect. Their gazes were furtive, loaded with suspicion and something more, something that seemed almost like envy. They greeted me with stiff bows but moved away as I passed, as if my proximity could contaminate them. He, the king, ordered that I be personally instructed by his counselors. No one understood his decision. Some said he desired me, others that he intended to use me as proof against his own counsel. I heard the whispers in the corridors, the speculations murmured behind closed doors. Each theory was more absurd than the last, but they all shared the same disbelief. I, however, saw no desire in his eyes. I saw a burden, as if my face reminded him of something he dared not confess. There was a pain there, buried so deep it only revealed itself in brief flashes when he thought no one was looking. The following nights were long. I heard footsteps in the hallway, muffled voices, doors opening slowly. No one dared to touch me, but everyone seemed to be measuring my breath, counting my silences. It was like living in a fishbowl, constantly watched but never touched. One of the oldest maids, Myra, brought me bread and looked at me with pity. She was a middle-aged woman with deep wrinkles around her eyes and hands calloused from work. "They fear him more than they love their gods," she whispered, glancing nervously at the door. "And now they fear you too." I had no reply. I just looked at the sky through the narrow window. The moon was a watchful eye, as lonely as I was. The stars seemed very distant, cold and indifferent to the human drama unfolding in the shadows of the temple. I wanted to understand what was happening, but every answer only brought more questions. Why had the king chosen me? What did he see in me that others did not? And what did this necklace mean, this incomplete circle that my mother had left me? In the main hall, the king summoned the council. They were all there, the monks in their brown robes and serious faces, the priestesses still pale from the shock of the previous night, the nobles in their sumptuous clothes looking on with poorly disguised curiosity. The tension in the air was palpable, thick as fog. He spoke little, but each word was a blow. "This young woman," he said, indicating me with a casual gesture, "is proof that the circle was corrupted long ago. She is not impure. You are the ones who have profaned the name of purity." Murmurs arose, indignation and fear mixed in a discordant chorus. The voices overlapped, growing in volume and intensity. The head priestess confronted him, trembling with either anger or fear. It was hard to tell. "Majesty, she is the daughter of the error." Her voice cracked on the high, notes breaking into something almost hysterical. He approached her, his gaze as dark as a gathering storm. "Then it was the error that sustained your vows all these years." The silence that followed was absolute. The priestess turned even paler, if that was possible, and recoiled as if she had been physically struck. I felt the blood pound in my temples. I, who had never had a voice, was becoming a symbol of something I didn't comprehend. Each beat of my heart seemed to echo in the silence of the hall. When his eyes returned to me, I realized there was no turning back. That man, the Alpha King, the judge of all, had chosen to raise me up, but not out of pity. Something in me threatened the very world he kept in order, and somehow he seemed to want me to threaten it. It was as if he were tired of the order he had built, as if he longed for something to disrupt it. There was an almost self-destructive quality to that desire, something that made me question his sanity or, perhaps, his humanity. I could see it in the way he looked at me, in the intensity that burned in those impossible eyes. It wasn't lust, at least not just that. It was something deeper, more dangerous. It was recognition. That night, when the hall emptied, he remained there, motionless, his back to me. The fire cast long shadows on the walls, making the figures in the frescoes seem to dance. I had stayed because I had not been dismissed, and I dared not leave without permission. The silence stretched between us like a chasm. Without turning his face, he said only, "You still don't understand what it is to be chosen." His voice was low, almost reflective, as if he were speaking more to himself than to me. I wanted to ask, wanted to demand answers, but the sound of my voice died in my throat. There was something in the atmosphere that made it impossible to speak, as if the very air had become too thick for words to pass through. "The circle that cast you out," he continued, "never knew what it guarded. Your mother tried to hide it, but the mark always returns. And now, no one will be able to erase it." He finally turned, and in the firelight, his face looked as if it were carved from stone, beautiful and terrible at the same time. "You carry something inside you that they have feared for generations. Something that I too once feared." He paused, his eyes piercing through me as if he could see through my skin to the core of my soul. "But fear is a prison, and I am tired of cages." The days that followed were strange and disconcerting. I was installed in a room that had once belonged to a high-born lady, far from the simple servants' quarters where I had spent my entire life. The walls were decorated with rich tapestries, the floor covered with soft carpets that swallowed the sound of my steps. There was a four-poster bed, fine linen sheets, a large window overlooking the temple's inner gardens. It all seemed unreal, as if I had woken up inside someone else's dream. The king's counselors came to instruct me, as he had ordered. They were old, serious men with suspicious eyes and hands that trembled slightly when they passed me ancient books. They taught me about the history of the kingdom, about the ancient lineages, about the forgotten rituals and the powers that had been buried by time and fear. I learned about the circle, not the stone circle of the temple, but the original circle, much older, much more powerful. A circle that had been broken for centuries, divided and hidden, so that its power would not destroy the world. And I learned about my mother. Not everything, but fragments, pieces of a story that the counselors told with reluctance, as if the very words burned their tongues. She had been a guardian of one of the fragments of the circle. She had tried to protect it, but she was discovered. And for that, she was condemned. "She died alone," said one of the counselors, a thin man with faded blue eyes, refusing to reveal where she had hidden her part of the circle. "But she left clues, marks, and you are one of them." His words hit me like physical blows. My mother had not died of illness or accident. She had been killed, executed for protecting something I still didn't fully understand. And I was her inheritance, her message to the future. The necklace I wore was not just a memento. It was a map, a key, a warning. I felt anger burn inside me, an anger I had never allowed myself to feel before. Anger for the mother I never knew, for the life that was stolen from me, for the shame I had carried without knowing why. The king kept appearing, always unexpectedly. Sometimes I would find him in the corridors at night, walking alone with only a torch to light his way. Other times he would enter the halls where I was being instructed, dismiss the counselors with a gesture, and stand there, watching me in silence. His presence was always unsettling, always charged with a tension I couldn't name. One night he found me in the gardens. I couldn't sleep and had gone out to breathe the cool pre-dawn air. He emerged from the shadows as if he were part of them. "Do you know why I chose you?" he asked without preamble. I shook my head, unable to form words. He came closer, so close I could feel the heat radiating from his body. "Because you are the only one who can destroy what I have built. And maybe that is exactly what this kingdom needs." His words made no sense, but there was a brutal truth in them that made me shiver. I have spent my life maintaining balance, preserving order. But order has become stagnation, and stagnation is just another form of death. He touched my face, his fingers tracing the line of my jaw. "You are chaos, little one, and I need you." I began to have dreams, vivid, intense dreams that felt more like memories than imagination. I saw my mother, young and beautiful, running through dark forests. I saw the circle, complete and shining, floating in the air while ancient voices sang in languages I shouldn't know but somehow understood. I saw the king, younger too, kneeling before something terrible and glorious. And I saw myself but not as I was now. I saw a version of me that burned with power, whose eyes shone with their own light, whose voice commanded storms. I would wake up startled, sweaty, with my heart racing and the certainty that these dreams were more than just my mind processing recent events. They were warnings. Or promises. Myra noticed the change in me. "You are transforming," she said one morning while helping me dress. "You can feel it, can't you? The power awakening inside you." I looked at my hands, which were trembling slightly. I could feel it, yes. Something growing, unfolding like a sinister flower. Something that frightened me and at the same time fascinated me. The council began to turn against the king. Whispers of treason circulated through the corridors. They said he had gone mad, that he was endangering the kingdom by protecting me. The priestesses organized purification rituals, trying to erase my presence with incense and prayers. The nobles conspired in dark corners, their voices filled with poorly disguised venom. But the king ignored it all. He seemed determined to follow a path that only he could see, carrying me with him whether I wanted to or not. And the truth was, I didn't know what I wanted. Part of me wished to be invisible again, to return to the safety of insignificance. But another part, a part that grew with each passing day, yearned for more. It yearned for the power I felt awakening, for the king's attention, for the possibility of being something more than a rejected servant. It was dangerous, this desire. I could feel how it was slowly corrupting me, changing the way I thought, the way I saw the world. But I couldn't resist it. One night I was awakened by screams. I ran to the window and saw torches moving through the gardens, heard loud voices demanding justice. A crowd had gathered, led by the priestesses and some disgruntled nobles. They were demanding my head, demanding that the king uphold the ancient laws and execute me as my mother had been executed. My blood ran cold. I looked at my bedroom door, expecting it to open at any moment, for guards to come in and drag me away. But instead, it was the king who entered. He didn't knock, just opened the door and walked to where I stood, trembling by the window. "Wear this," he said, throwing me a dark cloak. "It's time for you to see who you really are." Before I could ask what he meant, he took me by the hand and led me out of the room. Down hidden stairs I never knew existed through secret passages in the temple walls. We could hear the crowd above us, their shouts echoing off the stones. But we descended deeper and deeper, until we reached an underground chamber that glowed with its own light. The chamber was ancient, much older than the temple above. The walls were covered with symbols that seemed to pulse with life, and in the center was a stone platform where a fragment of something larger rested. I recognized it immediately. It was part of the circle, the same mark my necklace bore. "This is the fragment your mother guarded," the king said, his voice echoing in the chamber. "She hid it here, but I always knew where it was. I just didn't know how to activate it, until you appeared." He gently pushed me toward the platform. "Touch it." I hesitated, fear and curiosity warring within me. "What will happen?" I asked with a trembling voice. He smiled, but it was a sad smile. "The truth. And the truth always has a price." I extended my hand, my fingers trembling, and touched the cold metal fragment. Immediately, an explosion of light and sensation engulfed me. I saw everything. I saw the complete history of the circle, its power, its destruction, its division. I saw the guardians who had given their lives to hide it. I saw my mother beautiful and fierce facing her executioners without fear. And I saw myself at the center of it all, the last guardian, the one who would decide if the circle would be restored or destroyed forever. When I came to, I was on the floor, the king holding me. Tears were streaming down my face, but I didn't know if they were of pain or joy. "Now you know," he said softly, brushing my hair from my face. "You are the key. You always were. And they all know it, even if they don't want to admit it. That's why they fear you. That's why they wanted to destroy you before you found out." I looked at him, really looked, and saw beyond the mask of power and authority. I saw a man who was tired, scared, but also hopeful. "Why are you helping me?" I whispered. "What do you gain from this?" He touched my face with an unexpected tenderness. "A chance for redemption, a chance to undo the mistakes of the past. Your ancestors and mine? We made terrible choices. We broke the circle for fear of its power, but in breaking it, we condemned this world to a slow decay. Everything is dying, you can feel it. The land, the magic, even the faith of the people. And only you can reverse it." Above us, the cries of the crowd continued. But down there in that ancient chamber, something was changing. I could feel the power flowing from the fragment into me, filling empty spaces I didn't even know existed. My hands began to glow with a soft light, and symbols appeared on my skin, the same symbols as on the walls. "What do I do now?" I asked, amazed and terrified by what was happening to me. The king stood up, helping me to my feet. "Now you face your destiny. You go up these stairs and show them who you really are. And then, together we will decide the future of this kingdom." I looked at the dark stairs that led back to the temple, back to the furious crowd that wanted me dead. Fear still existed within me, but it was smaller now, overshadowed by something greater. Purpose. Finally, I had a purpose. I was no longer just the rejected daughter of a dead woman. I was the guardian. I was the chosen one. And it was time to accept that. We ascended together, the king and I leaving the secret chamber behind. With each step, I felt the power growing inside me, becoming more stable, more controllable. When we reached the great hall of the temple, we found the doors broken down, the crowd invading the sacred space. Priestesses screamed, nobles brandished swords, and at the center of it all was the head priestess, her white veils now stained with dust and rage. "Where is she?" she screamed. "Where is the abomination?" The king let go of me, taking a step forward. "Here," he said in a thundering voice. "The guardian is here." He pushed me gently forward, and I stumbled into the light, all eyes turning to me. I saw the hatred, the fear, the revulsion. But I also saw in some faces curiosity and something that might have been hope. I took a deep breath, letting the power flow through me, and when I spoke, my voice was no longer weak or hesitant. It was firm, clear, laden with an authority that came from ancient ages. "I am the daughter of the guardian. I carry the blood and the duty of my lineage. And I will no longer hide." I raised my hands, and the symbols glowed with increasing intensity. The chamber trembled, and light began to spring from the floor, from the walls, converging on me. The incomplete circle on my necklace took flight, floating in the air, spinning slowly. And then it happened. From secret places all over the temple, other fragments of the circle began to respond, called by my power. They flew through walls and floors, bright and singing, gathering around me. The crowd fell back, terrified and fascinated. The head priestess fell to her knees, her face as pale as wax. "Impossible," she whispered. The circle was destroyed. The fragments were lost. The king smiled, a fierce and triumphant smile. Lost only to those who didn't know where to look. But I knew. I always knew. And I waited. I waited for the true guardian, the one who could reunite what was broken. The fragments circled faster around me, their edges beginning to merge, the light intensifying until it became almost unbearable. I could feel the power of the complete circle, vast and ancient, pressing against me, testing me. Would I be crushed, or would I rise? I chose to rise. I opened my arms, embraced the power, let it flood me. Pain exploded through every nerve, but with the pain came clarity. I saw the past and the future, the invisible webs that connected all things. I saw the kingdom slowly dying, its magic draining away like blood from a wound that would never heal. And I saw the path to heal that wound. The fragments merged into a complete ring of golden light that hovered above my head like a crown. My body levitated off the floor, suspended in the air by the sheer force of the ancient power. When I opened my eyes, I knew they shone with their own light. "This kingdom is broken," I said, my voice echoing as if multiple voices were speaking at once. "Broken because you feared the power that was meant to protect you. You broke the circle, killed the guardians, buried the truth under layers of lies and dogma. But no more." I looked at the priestess. "You called me impure? But the impurity is in you, in your corruption of the sacred, in your transformation of faith into a tool of control and oppression." I descended slowly to the floor, my feet touching the cold stone. The circle came down with me, shrinking until it once again became the necklace around my neck, but now complete, closed, pulsing with contained power. The glow in my eyes subsided, but it didn't disappear completely. I was changed, transformed into something between human and something else. The crowd watched me in absolute silence. Even those who had come demanding my death were now paralyzed, unable to move or speak. The king approached, kneeling before me. It was a shocking gesture, the most powerful ruler in the kingdom kneeling before one who had been a servant. "The guardian has returned," he said loudly for all to hear. "And with her, the hope of healing for our land. Who among you will dare to oppose her now?" No one spoke. No one moved. The silence stretched on, heavy and pregnant with possibilities. Finally, a voice rose. It was Myra, the old servant who had slipped to the back of the hall. "I follow her," she said, her voice trembling but determined. "If she is the guardian, then I follow her." One by one, other voices joined in. First the servants and the poor, then some of the younger monks, and finally, reluctantly, some of the nobles. Not all, not by a long shot, but enough. Enough to form the nucleus of something new. The head priestess remained on her knees, her face a mask of defeat and desolation. "What will you do with us?" she asked, her voice almost inaudible. "With those who condemned you?" I looked at her, and for a moment I felt the urge for revenge burn within me. It would be so easy to make them suffer as my mother had suffered, as I had suffered. But then I felt the presence of the circle, its ancient wisdom, and I understood. "Nothing," I finally replied. "I will do nothing. You will live with your choices, with the knowledge of what you have done. And if you can find redemption, that will be your own journey. But you will no longer rule. You will no longer dictate who is pure or impure. That era is over." I turned to the king. "And you? What is your role in this new world?" He stood up, his eyes meeting mine. "Whatever you wish. I am your servant, your sword, your shield. You are the guardian. I am just the king." The days that followed were chaotic. The news of my transformation spread quickly, twisting and growing with each retelling. Some called me a savior, others a witch. There was resistance, of course. Factions within the temple and the court that refused to accept the new order. But the king was relentless in his loyalty, and the power of the complete circle was undeniable. Slowly, the land began to respond. Fields that had been barren began to sprout green again. Rivers that had dried up began to flow once more. Magic, which had been but a distant memory, began to return to the world. And with it, hope. I learned to use my power wisely, to balance strength with compassion. The king's counselors, those who had instructed me, now served me, helping me understand the complexities of governing and guiding. Because that's what I had become, I realized. Not just a guardian of an ancient artifact, but a leader, a beacon for those who had lost their way. It was frightening and exhilarating at the same time. The king and I developed a strange partnership. He ruled the kingdom through laws and force, I through magic and renewed faith. There was tension between us, there always was, but also a deep respect and something more, something neither of us was ready to name. Sometimes late at night, he would come to my chambers and we would talk about the future, about our fears and hopes. In those moments, he was not the fearsome Alpha King, and I was not the powerful guardian. We were just two individuals carrying burdens that were too heavy, finding comfort in each other's presence. "You know," he said one night, "you've changed everything. Not just the kingdom, but me too." I looked at him, seeing the rarely displayed vulnerability. "How?" I asked softly. He hesitated, struggling with the words. "You showed me that power doesn't have to be a prison. That strength can coexist with compassion. I spent so long fearing what the circle could do, fearing the chaos it could bring, that I became rigid. inflexible, dead in all but name. He touched my face, his fingers tracing the luminous marks that now remained on my skin. But you embraced the chaos and molded it into something beautiful, something alive. Months passed, turning into seasons. The kingdom prospered in ways it hadn't in generations, but I knew I couldn't stay forever. The complete circle around me pulsed with restlessness, calling me to other places, other lands that needed healing. It was the nature of the Guardian, I understood. Not to belong to one place, but to wander, carrying the blessing of the circle wherever it was needed. The thought of leaving filled me with sadness, but also with anticipation. There was so much world to see, so much to do. When I finally told the king about my departure, I saw the pain cross his face before he could mask it. "When?" he asked simply. "Soon," I replied. "The circle is complete here, the land is healed. But there are other places that suffer, other peoples who need hope." He nodded slowly. "And me? Can I go with you?" His voice was vulnerable in a way it had never been before. I smiled, touching his hand. "You are the king. Your place is here, guiding your people. But that doesn't mean it's a permanent goodbye. I will return. I will always return." He pulled me into his arms, holding me tightly. "Promise me," he whispered against my hair. "Promise me you'll come back." "I promise," I replied, and it was a promise I intended to keep. On the day of my departure, half the kingdom seemed to have gathered to say goodbye. Myra cried openly, as did many others who had become friends in those strange and wonderful months. The priestesses, including the head one who had condemned me, came to offer blessings, their faces marked by regret and acceptance. The nobles bowed, and even those who had resisted my rise showed reluctant respect. The king stood by my side, his presence a comfort and an agony. When it was time to leave, he walked me to the temple gates, beyond which the road stretched, snaking toward the unknown horizon. "Don't forget us," he said, trying to sound formal but failing. "Never," I replied. "How could I? You turned me from nothing into something, from Impure into a guardian. This will always be my home, no matter where I go." I leaned in and kissed him, a soft kiss full of unspoken promises. When I pulled away, I saw tears shining in his eyes, though he fought to keep them in. I walked down the road feeling the weight of hundreds of gazes on my back, but I didn't look back. Looking back was for those who doubted, and I no longer doubted. The circle around my neck glowed softly, warming my skin, guiding me. I could feel its will merging with mine, leading me toward the next place that needed healing, the next people who needed hope. The road ahead was long and uncertain, filled with dangers and challenges I could barely imagine. But it was also full of possibilities. I was no longer the scared child, cast out of the temple and marked as impure. I was the guardian, bearer of the complete circle, a weaver of ancient and new magic. And wherever I went, I would carry with me not just power, but also the lessons I had learned. That true purity came not from ritual or dogma, but from compassion and courage. That the greatest power was that used to lift others up, not to oppress them. And that even from rejection and pain, something beautiful could blossom. The sun began to set, painting the sky in gold and red. I quickened my pace, eager to see what awaited beyond the horizon. Behind me, the kingdom that had cast me out now prospered, healed and renewed. Since then, I have carried the weight of that sentence within me, but it is no longer a burden. It is a purpose. No longer a servant, no longer impure, just a living frontier between faith and doubt, between the old world and the new. Sometimes in my dreams I see the king in the corridors and our gazes cross like swords. There is something inevitable about it, something that the sky itself seems to watch over. I understand now why he raised me up, not because he saw in me the mirror of his own sin, but because he saw in me the possibility of redemption, for him and for all of us. But one thing I know, with an absolute certainty that burns like fire in my heart, the sacred circle is no longer closed. And I, the impure one, am the crack through which the truth begins to enter. I am living proof that judgments can be wrong, that condemnations can be unjust, and that even those marked as impure can carry the purest light. My journey is just beginning, and I know there will be moments of doubt, moments when I will question if I am worthy of the power I carry. But then I will remember where I came from, what I survived, and I will move forward. Because that is the essence of being a guardian. Not to be perfect, but to be determined. Not to be invincible, but to be tireless. And so I walk under the infinite sky, carrying the complete circle and all the hopes and fears it represents. The road stretches before me, full of mysteries and wonders yet undiscovered. And I, who once had neither name nor place, now have a purpose that transcends both. I am the Guardian, and this is only the first page of my story. The first village I found was dying. Not from famine or disease, but from something more subtle and insidious. Hope had drained from it like water through open fingers. The people walked with hunched shoulders, empty eyes, moving through their lives like sleepwalkers. The children didn't laugh. The fields, though cultivated, produced withered and bitter harvests. When I entered the central square, the villagers watched me with poorly disguised suspicion and fear. A stranger was always suspect, but a stranger with symbols glowing faintly on her skin was something else entirely. An old man, bent by the weight of difficult years, approached cautiously. "What do you want here, stranger?" he asked, his voice as rough as gravel. "We have nothing to offer travelers." I looked around, feeling the earth beneath my feet. It was sick, poisoned not by physical toxins, but by something deeper: despair, resignation, the slow death of a people's collective soul. "I haven't come to ask," I replied softly. "I've come to offer." The circle around my neck pulsed, warming my skin, and the symbols on my arms shone more intensely. The villagers backed away, murmuring among themselves, making gestures against the evil eye. It took me days to earn their trust. I started with small gestures. I healed a child who had been feverish for weeks, the local healers unable to do anything but watch her fade. I touched her burning forehead and let the power of the circle flow through me, driving the sickness from her small body. When she opened her eyes for the first time in days and asked for food, her mother fell to her knees before me, weeping with gratitude. Then, I walked through the fields, pressing my hands against the hardened earth, whispering ancient words the circle had taught me. Slowly, very slowly, the earth began to respond. Green shoots began to push through the arid soil. The water from the well, which had been muddy and bitter, cleared and became sweet again. But healing the land was the easy part. Healing the people was much harder. They had spent so long in despair that they had almost forgotten how to live any other way. The old man, whose name I learned was Turen, sat with me one night around a weak fire. "Why do you help us?" he asked, genuinely confused. "You don't know us. You owe us nothing." I looked at the dancing flames, seeing reflections of my past in them. Because someone once helped me when I didn't deserve it. Because I know what it's like to be marked as unworthy and still find redemption. He was silent for a long moment. "You speak like someone who has known great pain. And great transformation," I added. "One cannot exist without the other." The weeks turned into months in that small village. I stayed longer than I intended, but something kept me there. Perhaps it was their need, so deep and genuine. Or perhaps it was my own need to prove that I could make a difference, that the power I carried was not just destructive, but also reconstructive. I taught them about the circle, about the balance between giving and receiving, about how true strength came from community and not from selfish individualism. Slowly I saw the change. Smiles began to appear on faces that had forgotten how to form them. The children started playing again. The fields flourished, and something deeper changed too. The people began to believe again, not in distant gods or empty rituals, but in themselves, in their ability to shape their own destinies. At night, lying under the stars, I thought of the king. I wondered how he was, if the kingdom continued to prosper, if he thought of me as much as I thought of him. The circle sometimes pulsed in a strange way, as if it were receiving echoes of something distant. Echoes of him, perhaps. Our connection had become deeper than I had realized, intertwined not just by circumstance, but by something more fundamental. Destiny, perhaps. Or just the inexorable gravity of two souls who recognized each other. One night, I had a dream that was more than a dream. I saw the king on his throne, alone in the great empty hall. His head was bowed as if he carried an invisible weight. Then he raised his face and his eyes met mine across the impossible distance between us. "Are you well?" I asked, my voice echoing strangely in the dream space. He smiled, but it was a sad smile, as well as one can be when half of oneself is missing. His words touched me more deeply than I expected. "I'll come back," I promised again. "Just not yet." I know, he replied. Your work is important, but promise me something else. Anything. He hesitated, and for a moment I thought the connection would break. But then he said, his voice low and intense, don't lose yourself. Don't let the power consume you. I've seen what happens to those who carry burdens that are too great. They forget who they were. I won't forget, I promised. How could I? You wouldn't let me. He reached out his hand, and though I knew it was just a dream, just a projection, I reached out mine as well. Our fingers didn't touch, they couldn't, but I felt his warmth anyway, real and comforting. When I woke up, there were tears on my face and a renewed determination in my heart. The day came to leave the village. The villagers gathered to say goodbye, their faces so different from when I arrived. Where there was once despair, there was now life. Torin hugged me as if I were his own daughter. You gave us back to ourselves, he said with a choked voice. How can we thank you? By living, I replied simply. By living fully, loving fiercely, and never giving up even when things get hard again. And remember that the strength is within you. I just helped you remember it. I distributed hugs and blessings, felt small hands clinging to my clothes, saw mixed tears and smiles. And then, as I had done before, I turned and walked down the road that led away. But this time, when I looked back one last time, I saw not desolation, but renewal. And I knew I had made a difference. Not a small or insignificant difference, but something fundamental and lasting. The circle on my neck glowed with approval, and I felt a wave of satisfaction that was not just mine, but its as well. The circle was pleased with the work we had done together. And somewhere, through the invisible bond we shared, I felt that the king was also pleased. Proud even, of what I had become, of what I was accomplishing. The road ahead snaked through mist-covered hills, promising new challenges, new places that needed healing. And I walked toward them without fear. The second land I found was completely different. It was not a small, humble village, but a city, large and prosperous on the surface. Stone towers rose toward the sky. Markets bustled with activity, and the streets were filled with people. But beneath the shiny surface, I could feel the rot, glaring inequality. The rich lived in ornate palaces while the poor starved in the shadows. The magic here had not disappeared, but it had been monopolized, controlled by an elite of mages who used their power to oppress rather than uplift. When I entered the city, I attracted immediate attention. My shining symbols, the circle on my neck, the aura of ancient power I carried, all of it marked me as someone dangerous. Guards stopped me at the gates. State your business, the captain demanded, his hand resting on his sword. I am a traveler, I replied calmly. I seek only passage and perhaps a place to rest. His eyes narrowed, scanning me from head to toe. A traveler? With magic marks like those? I think not. No mage enters this city without permission from the council. I am not a mage, I said, and it was technically true. I was something more, something they had no words to describe. I'm a guardian. Laughter. The guards exchanged amused glances. A guardian? Guardian of what? Before I could answer, a voice cut through the mockery. Let her pass. A man emerged from the crowd, dressed in elaborate robes that marked him as a member of this council. He was young, perhaps a few years older than me, with sharp, intelligent eyes that assessed me with clinical interest. My name is Kyle, he said, bowing slightly. I am a member of the Council of Mages, and you, mysterious guardian, intrigue me. Please accept my hospitality. There was a trap in that invitation, I could feel it. But also an opportunity. If I wanted to understand what was wrong with this city and how to fix it, I needed to get inside. I accept, I replied cautiously. Kyle smiled, and it was the smile of a predator. Excellent. Come. There is much I would like to discuss with you. As we walked through the streets, he spoke of the city, its history, its achievements. But I heard what he didn't say. I heard it in the muffled voices of the poor who watched us pass, in the resentful glances cast toward the mages' palaces, in the heavy air of oppression that hung over everything like a toxic fog. This city was sick as the previous village, but in a different way. There, the sickness was of despair. Here, it was of injustice. Kyle took me to the council, an imposing building in the center of the city, all white marble and stained glass. Inside, other mages awaited me, their faces curious and hostile in equal measure. I present to you an unusual visitor, Kyle announced. A guardian, she claims, with a power I do not recognize. The mages approached, examining me as scientists would examine a strange specimen. Where does this power come from? Asked an older woman, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I feel no connection to any of the known lines of magic. Because it isn't magic, I replied. Not in the sense that you understand. It is something older, more fundamental. I touched the circle at my neck. I am the guardian of the complete circle, reunited after centuries of separation. And I bring its power to heal wounded lands. Silence. Then laughter. Not from all, but from many. The circle is a myth, declared a stout man with a booming voice. A fairy tale told to scare children. And yet here I am, I said calmly. Bearing that which you say does not exist. I raised my hands and let the power flow. The symbols on my skin shone intensely, and the circle levitated from my neck, expanding, growing until it was large enough to encircle the entire chamber. Golden light filled the space, and for a moment they saw. They saw what the circle truly was, the vastness of its power, the antiquity of its wisdom. And they also saw how small and limited their magic was in comparison. The circle shrank again, returning to its place around my neck. The mages were pale, some visibly trembling. Kyle, however, just smiled more broadly. Fascinating, he murmured. Absolutely fascinating. And you say you use this power to heal? Yes, I replied. To restore balance, to bring hope where it has been lost? Noble, said Kyle. But there was something in his tone that made me shiver. But naive. Power is not for healing. It is for controlling. I realized then the mistake I had made. Showing my power here, in this place where power was currency and control was law, had been like waving meat in front of hungry predators. They didn't see the circle as a tool for healing. They saw it as a weapon, as a means to further consolidate their dominion over the city and beyond. You cannot have the circle, I said firmly. It is not meant to be possessed or controlled. It simply is. Kyle took a step toward me, his eyes shining with poorly disguised greed. Everything can be possessed, Guardian. Everything has a price. What is yours? I am not for sale, I replied, backing toward the door. But I found the way was blocked. Guards had appeared, silent and threatening. The trap had sprung. Then you will be our guest, Kyle said softly, until we decide what to do with you and your wonderful power. Energy crackled in the air as the mages prepared spells. I could feel their intent. They didn't want to kill me, at least not immediately. They wanted to capture me, study me, figure out how to take the circle from me. I took a deep breath, centering myself. I had fought before, survived before, and I would do it again. The circle responded to my determination, power surging through me like a tide. One last chance, I warned. Let me leave in peace and there will be no violence. Kyle laughed. Oh, naive Guardian. The violence began the moment you entered our city. Now it is only a matter of who will be victorious. The spells came then, rays of magical energy converging on me from all directions. But the circle was faster, stronger. A barrier of golden light erupted around me, absorbing the attacks, turning them to nothing. The battle that followed was brief but intense. The mages were powerful, experienced, working in coordination. But they were limited by their narrow understanding of magic, by their rules and structures. I had no such limitations. The circle followed no rules. It was older than rules, the source from which all magic flowed. I didn't want to hurt them, not really. But I needed to escape, and they couldn't let me go. So I used the minimum force necessary, creating bursts of light that blinded them, waves of power that knocked them down without serious injury. Kyle was the last to fall, his face contorted in fury and frustration. This isn't over, he spat. We will hunt you. The council does not forget. Then let them not forget this either, I replied, my voice echoing with authority borrowed from the circle. Power without compassion is tyranny. Magic without purpose is empty. You have built an empire on the backs of the weak, and one day, that empire will fall. I looked around the chamber, meeting the eyes of each mage. But it doesn't have to be this way. You can choose differently. You can use your gifts to uplift instead of oppress. The choice is yours. Without waiting for a reply, I burst through the walls, not with destructive force, but by simply becoming intangible, walking through the stone as if it were mist. It was a trick the circle had taught me, manipulating reality at the most fundamental level. When I emerged on the other side, I was in the city streets, surrounded by surprised citizens. I did not run. I walked calmly, letting them see me, letting them see that the mages were not invincible, that there was a power beyond what the council controlled. In the shadows of the city, I found the poor, the oppressed, those who lived on the margins. They were the ones who hid me when the council sent hunters. They were the ones who fed me and offered me shelter. And in return, I shared what I knew. I taught them about the circle, about how magic was not the property of an elite, but a part of everything and everyone. I showed them that they too had power, just dormant, waiting to be awakened. I spent weeks in the shadows, moving from hideout to hideout, always one step ahead of the hunters. And in every place I stopped, I planted seeds. Seeds of resistance, of hope, of change. I taught the people to stand up, to demand their rights, to not accept oppression as inevitable. I saw sparks of rebellion ignite in eyes that had been dead for a long time. And I knew that even when I left, those sparks would grow into flames. The city would change, maybe not immediately, maybe not without pain, but it would change, because I had shown that it was possible. One night, before finally leaving, I climbed to the top of the tallest tower and looked at the city spread out below. I could see the division clearly from my elevated position, the glittering palaces of the mages on one side, the dark slums of the poor on the other. But I could also see movement in the shadows, organization, purpose. Change was coming, and although I would not be there to see it, I knew it would happen. The circle pulsed its approval, and this time, I also felt something more. A warning. There was something ahead. Something significant. Something that would test everything I had become. I turned toward the horizon to where the road called me and descended from the tower. Months passed in travel. I visited dozens of places, small and large, each with its own pains and needs. I healed poisoned lands and broken hearts. I confronted tyrants and comforted victims. I taught and learned, gave and received. And through it all, I felt the connection with the king, that invisible thread that linked us across any distance. Sometimes, in dreams, we would talk. Other times, it was just a feeling, a knowledge that he was there, thinking of me just as I thought of him. But gradually, something began to change. The connection grew weaker, as if something was interfering. The dreams became rare, confusing, fragmented. And a slow fear began to grow inside me. Was he okay? Was the kingdom prospering as we had hoped? Or had something gone wrong? The circle also began to act strangely. It pulsed with increasing urgency, pulling me in a specific direction. Back to where it all began. Back to the kingdom, to the temple, to him. I resisted at first. There was so much work still to do, so many places that needed me. But the urgency grew until it was impossible to ignore. Something was wrong. Gravely wrong. Finally, I gave in. I turned from the road I had been following and began the journey back. I traveled faster now, using the circle's power to cover distances in days that would normally take weeks. The landscape passed in a blur around me, but I barely noticed it. All my attention was focused ahead on the rapidly approaching destination, on the kingdom I had left, on the man I had promised to return to. When I finally spotted the temple towers on the horizon, my heart was pounding. Something was definitely wrong. I could feel it in the earth, in the air, in the way even the birds seemed to avoid flying over that place. I quickened my pace, running now, the circle glowing brightly against my chest. The temple gates were closed, guarded by soldiers in black armor I didn't recognize. When I tried to enter, they crossed their spears. "No one enters," one of them said, his voice muffled by his helmet. "Orders from the council." "What council?" I demanded. "The king rules here, not some council." The guards exchanged glances. "The king is incapacitated," the other one finally said. "The council has assumed temporary control until he recovers." My blood ran cold. Incapacitated. What had they done to him? "Get out of my way," I said, my voice low and dangerous. "I will not ask again." "We can't," the first guard replied, but I could hear the uncertainty in his voice. He could see the symbols glowing on my skin, feel the power emanating from me. He didn't want to face me, but he had orders. "Then I am sorry," I said sincerely. And then, before they could react, I burst through them, not with violence, but with sheer force of will. The barrier of golden light simply pushed them aside, gentle but irresistible. I ran through the gates, through the gardens that now seemed wild and neglected, through corridors that had been familiar but now seemed strange and threatening. Guards tried to stop me, but I left them behind, moving faster than human eyes could follow. Finally, I reached the great hall. The doors were locked, but that didn't matter. Bursting through doors had become second nature. Inside, I found a scene that made my anger boil. The king was chained to the throne, chains that glowed with suppressive magic. He was pale, weak, clearly drained of strength. Around him were figures in counselors' robes, but I recognized their faces. They were the same ones who had tried to cast me out, the priestesses and nobles who had condemned me as impure. They had regrouped, waited for their chance, and when I left, when the king was vulnerable without my presence to balance him, they had struck. "Release him," I demanded, my voice echoing in the hall. "Now." The head priestess, older now but still full of venom, turned to me with a triumphant smile. "The abomination returns. Perfect. We can finally finish what we started." "You don't understand what you're doing," I said, forcing calm into my voice. "The chains you've put on him don't just suppress his power. They are slowly killing him." "Then let him die," she spat. "He betrayed everything this temple stands for when he chose you over us. He deserves nothing less than death." Something inside me broke then. There was no more room for compassion, not for those who repeatedly chose hatred, who refused to learn. The circle exploded in a blinding light, and this time I did not hold back its strength. The wave of power swept through the hall, knocking down the counselors like straw dolls. The chains around the king shattered into 1,000 pieces. And I walked through the chaos, my eyes fixed on him, only on him. When I reached the throne, I knelt beside him. His eyes opened, focusing on me with difficulty. "You came back," he whispered, his voice weak but full of relief. "I promised I would," I replied, touching his face gently. "Always." I let the power of the circle flow from me to him, healing the damage the chains had caused, restoring his strength. Color returned to his face and his breathing became deeper, more stable. Behind us, I heard the counselors recovering, murmuring among themselves. I knew they would have to be dealt with, that this betrayal could not be ignored. But first, I needed to make sure he was okay. "How long?" I asked. "How long have they been doing this to you?" "Months," he admitted. "It started subtly, small restrictions, small challenges to my authority. By the time I realized how far they had gone, it was too late. They had enough support from the council, enough strength, and He hesitated, looking ashamed. "I was weak without you. Your presence balanced me in ways I didn't fully understand until you left." His words touched me deeply. I helped him up, supporting him as he found his feet. Together we turned to face those who had tried to destroy him. The head priestess stared at us with pure hatred. "You will not win," she hissed. "The people will never accept the rule of an abomination and a weak king who bowed to her." "Then let the people decide," said a voice from the entrance. I turned and saw Myra, the old servant, accompanied by hundreds of others. Common citizens, servants, merchants, farmers, the people who formed the backbone of the kingdom. "We heard what happened," Myra said, her voice surprisingly strong. "And we came, because we remember what it was like before her, when the land was dying and hope was lost. And we remember how everything changed when she came." One by one, the citizens entered the hall, filling it to overflowing, and one by one they knelt. Not just to the king, but to me as well, to both of us. The symbol of what we had become together. A balance between ancient power and modern authority. Between magic and law. Between past and future. The priestess looked around, seeing her base of support crumble. She tried to speak, but her voice was drowned out by the chorus of voices declaring loyalty. Finally defeated, she bowed her head. The king raised his hand and silence fell over the hall. "For too long," he began, his voice growing stronger with each word, "we have allowed fear to rule this kingdom. Fear of the different, fear of the unknown, fear of change. But fear is not a foundation for a just society. It is a prison." He looked at me, and I saw pride and love in his eyes. "This woman, whom you once called impure, taught me that true strength comes from embracing what we fear, from finding harmony between opposites, and that is what we will do from now on. No more divisions between pure and impure, between worthy and unworthy. Just people trying to build something better together." Applause echoed through the hall so loud the walls trembled. And in that moment, I felt something fundamentally change. The The circle around me pulsed with deep satisfaction, and I knew this was the moment for which everything had prepared me. Not just to heal a land or confront tyrants, but to completely transform a kingdom, a society, a way of thinking. The work would be long and difficult. There would be resistance, setbacks, moments of doubt. But together, the king and I, balancing each other, we could do it. We could create something new and better. So, dear reader, if this story has touched your heart in any way, if you have seen yourself in my struggles or found hope in my journey, let your light shine too. Leave a comment sharing your thoughts, a like so that others can find this story, and subscribe to follow more journeys like this. Because stories come to life when they are shared, when they resonate from heart to heart. And perhaps somewhere in your own struggles you too will discover that what the world calls impure may just be misunderstood, waiting for the right moment to reveal its true brilliance. May you find your own light, your own complete circle, and the courage to embrace it no matter what others say. May you know that even in the deepest darkness, there is always the possibility of transformation, of redemption, of becoming something greater than what they tried to make you. And that when the call comes, when your destiny knocks on the door, you have the courage to open it and welcome it, even knowing that the path ahead will be difficult. Because in the end, it is not the easy days that define us, but those in which we choose to stand up, even when it would be simpler to stay down.